What happens when a wealthy man's routine drive turns into a life-changing encounter with a humble boy in a small town? Watch till the end to see how one act of kindness sets off a chain of events that transforms both their lives in ways they never imagined. The sun hung low in the Kentucky sky, casting golden rays over the endless stretch of asphalt. The countryside was quiet save for the distant hum of cicadas, and the heat of the day clung to the earth like a heavy blanket. Matthew Evans sat in his silver Mercedes, the air conditioning humming softly, though it did little to combat the oppressive warmth. At 78, Matthew was a man used to control. Decades spent in the financial world had shaped him into a figure of precision and power. He had built his life around numbers, deals, and results. But at that moment, none of it mattered. The car was stranded on the side of the road, its rear tire flat and lifeless. Matthew's phone sat on the dashboard, useless without a signal. He tapped his thumb impatiently against the steering wheel, his crisp white shirt clinging to his back. He sighed heavily. This wasn't how his day was supposed to go. As he leaned back, contemplating his next move, he noticed a figure approaching. A boy, no older than 14, was walking along the side of the road. His t-shirt was faded, his sneakers scuffed, and his hair slightly unkempt. Yet there was something purposeful in his stride, something that made Matthew sit up a little straighter. The boy stopped a few feet away, his sharp eyes taking in the car and the flat tire. "Got a flat, sir?" he asked, his voice steady and polite. "Yes," Matthew replied, his tone clipped. "I was hoping for some roadside assistance, but my phone has no signal." The boy nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I can help with that. My grandpa taught me how to change a tire. Do you have a spare?" Matthew hesitated for a moment, then gestured toward the trunk. "It's in there." The boy walked to the trunk and opened it, pulling out the spare tire and the jack with an efficiency that surprised Matthew. Without another word, he knelt beside the flat tire and got to work. His hands moved confidently, loosening the bolts and lifting the car with the jack. Matthew watched, a strange mix of gratitude and curiosity building in him. "What's your name?" Matthew asked after a moment. "Elijah," the boy replied without looking up. "Elijah, thank you. You're saving me a lot of trouble." Elijah shrugged as he tightened the final bolt. "It's no trouble, sir." When the tire was secured, Elijah stood and wiped his hands on his jeans. "All done," he said simply, offering a small, satisfied smile. Matthew reached into his wallet and pulled out several crisp bills. "Here, take this. I really appreciate your help." Elijah stepped back, raising a hand in polite refusal. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need anything. I'm just happy to help." Before Matthew could respond, Elijah turned and began walking back down the road, his steps unhurried, his shoulders relaxed. Matthew stood there, the money still in his hand, watching the boy until he disappeared into the horizon. For the rest of the drive home, Matthew couldn't shake the memory of Elijah. There had been something disarming about his quiet confidence, something profoundly rare. By the time he pulled into the long driveway of his sprawling estate, he felt a strange tug in his chest, an unfamiliar sense of humility. That night, as Matthew sat in his study sipping scotch, he found himself unable to focus on anything but the boy. His mind wandered to Elijah's worn shoes, his calm demeanor, and the way he had refused the money without hesitation. It was a gesture Matthew hadn't encountered in decades. The next morning, driven by an impulse he couldn't quite explain, Matthew decided to find the boy. He didn't know what he would say or do, but he knew he couldn't let the encounter end there. He drove back to the stretch of road where he'd first met Elijah, scanning the horizon for any sign of him. After hours of searching, he stopped at a small diner and described the boy to the waitress behind the counter. "Sounds like you're talking about Elijah," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's always helping folks around here. Lives with his mama over in Harlan." "Harlan?" Matthew repeated, jotting down the name. "Yes, sir. It's about an hour from here, up in the hills." Matthew thanked her and set off toward Harlan, the rolling hills giving way to a small, quiet town nestled in the Appalachian foothills. It was a far cry from the bustling cityscapes Matthew had spent most of his life in. The streets were lined with modest homes, and the air was filled with the scent of wood smoke and wildflowers. After asking around, Matthew was directed to a small house on the edge of town. The house was modest but tidy, with a sagging front porch and a well-worn path leading to the door. He parked his car and hesitated for a moment before knocking. A woman in her early 40s answered the door. She had kind eyes and a weary but warm smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Good morning," Matthew said, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe I met your son yesterday. Elijah, right? He helped me with a flat tire." Her expression softened instantly. "That sounds like my Elijah," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "He's always helping folks. Come in, won't you?" Matthew stepped inside, taking in the modest surroundings. The furniture was old but clean, the walls adorned with family photos and a few hand-drawn pictures. The room radiated a warmth that Matthew's lavish home lacked. "Elijah's out back fixing the fence," the woman said, gesturing toward the backyard. Matthew found Elijah kneeling beside the fence, hammering a loose board into place. When the boy looked up and saw Matthew, his eyes widened in surprise. "Hey, mister," Elijah said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Boy, what are you doing here?" Matthew smiled, feeling strangely nervous. "I wanted to thank you properly. You helped me when I really needed it, and I couldn't stop thinking about it." Elijah tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. "It wasn't a big deal," he said simply. "But it was," Matthew insisted. "People don't usually help strangers without expecting something in return." Elijah shrugged, his gaze steady. "If someone needs help and I can do it, why wouldn't I?" Matthew was struck by the simplicity of the boy's logic. He glanced around the yard, taking in the mismatched boards on the fence, the old swing set in the corner, and the faded paint on the house. It was clear the family didn't have much, yet they made do with what they had. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," Matthew said, his voice sincere. "Your mother must be proud." "She is," Elijah said with a small grin. "She works hard. I just try to help out where I can." Matthew nodded, his mind already turning over ideas. This boy and his family deserved more than patched fences and worn furniture. They deserved stability, recognition, and an opportunity for something better. "I'd like to do something for you and your family," Matthew said at last. Elijah straightened, his expression cautious. "We're okay, mister. We don't need anything." "It's not about need," Matthew said firmly. "It's about what's right." Elijah's mother stepped out onto the porch, calling him in for lunch. She turned to Matthew, her voice warm. "Would you care to join us? Is nothing fancy, but you're welcome." Matthew hesitated, unused to such open invitations. But the sincerity in her voice left him no room to refuse. "I'd like that," he said. Inside, the house was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables. The table was small, surrounded by mismatched chairs, but it was set with care. As they ate, Matthew listened to Elijah talk about school, his friends, and his dream of becoming an engineer. His mother shared stories about the community, her voice tinged with quiet pride. For all his wealth and success, Matthew couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this kind of warmth and connection. After lunch, as they cleared the table, Matthew turned to Elijah's mother. "You've done a remarkable job raising him," he said. "He's got more heart than most people I know." She smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you. He's a good boy, but we've had our struggles. We've learned to appreciate the small things." Matthew nodded, his resolve solidifying. This family had given him a gift he hadn't realized he needed, a reminder of what truly mattered. He left their home that afternoon with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. The next morning, Matthew set his plan in motion. He called contractors, suppliers, and colleagues, organizing a complete renovation of the family's home. Within a week, trucks and workers began arriving at Elijah's house, transforming it from the ground up. At first, Elijah and his mother were overwhelmed. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice trembling as she watched the crew unload supplies. "I did," Matthew replied simply. "You gave me something I didn't know I was missing. Let me give back." Over the next several weeks, the house underwent a stunning transformation. The sagging porch was replaced with sturdy wood, the roof repaired, and the rusty swing set out back was replaced with a new one. Inside, the walls were painted, the floors polished, and the kitchen upgraded with modern appliances. Elijah's curiosity about the construction process blossomed into a passion. One of the workers took him under his wing, teaching him the basics of carpentry and engineering. Matthew watched from a distance, a warm pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something meaningful, something beyond himself. On the final day of the renovation, the family stood on the porch, marveling at the changes. Elijah's mother turned to Matthew, her voice thick with emotion. "This isn't just a house anymore, it's a home. I don't know how we can ever thank you." "You already have," Matthew said softly. "You reminded me of what life is supposed to be about: family, connection, and purpose. I think I'm the one who should be thanking you." As the sun set, Elijah joined Matthew on the porch. The boy's wide grin was infectious. "Mr. Matthew," Elijah said, his tone thoughtful, "I've been thinking about what you did for us. I want to do something like that one day. I want to help people too." Matthew placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You already are, Elijah. Your kindness set all of this in motion. Don't ever lose that." For the first time in years, Matthew felt at peace. It wasn't about what he had gained or lost. It was about what he had given and what he had received in return. And as he drove away from the house that night, the laughter and warmth of that family lingering in his heart, he knew his life would never be the same.